Hi guys, the point of this tutorial is just to introduce you to the rubric that we're going to use to grade you on your roller coaster projects. I know that a lot of you worry a lot about how you're going to be graded on things, and I just want to make sure it's very clear to you. So basically you're going to be graded on these 4 quality standards. They're pretty common throughout the school, a lot of rubrics have them in it. But the size of the writing shows you how important each one is. So following directions is only worth 5 points on the rubric. That's not nothing, but it's not that much. Presentation is worth 20 out of the 100 points. Supporting details is worth 30, and higher level thinking is worth 45 points. So the majority of your grade has to do with supporting details and higher level thinking. But if you don't follow directions and you don't pay attention to your overall presentation, it can really lower your grade, and it can be really annoying to get all 75 of the harder points and mess up these. So, and also keep in mind that if you decide that the project grade you get is not a grade you're happy with, only higher level thinking points can be gotten back, and we'll have to talk about how you can get back those points after the fact if that should happen to you. So go find your rubric if you don't already have it, see if you can locate it. It's on the Google Classroom if you don't have your physical copy anymore. Here's what it looks like. It looks like this. It says Holistic Roller Coaster Project Rubric, and you might remember, if you were in class that day, that I had you fill in the elements of higher level thinking underneath all of the design specifications are met or exceeded. Down there at the bottom, I had you fill that part in. So if you did not get that filled in, make sure you see somebody, because you definitely need to have that part filled in. That's for the prototype. Okay, so what I want to do now, though, is go over the stuff that's not for your prototype, because 80 out of the 100 points on this project don't have to do with just making your coaster work. It has to do with how you put together your documentary explaining how you built your roller coaster. Okay, let's talk about following directions. There were a lot of different directions that I gave you for this roller coaster, but there's certain key ones that if you don't follow those directions, it's going to affect your score here. Things like when you do your prototype, make sure you don't have any unauthorized parts. It should stand alone. You shouldn't be holding it up with your hands. You shouldn't have tape that wasn't purchased from the official tape. You might have been using practice tape, but your final model has to be built with the real tape, stuff like that. And there's a lot of little things like that. You want to go back through and think about what were all of my directions to you about that prototype. The documentary, there's a couple of things you have to make sure that you do. It has to be no longer than 8 minutes. It should be multimedia, meaning it should have sound, pictures, and text like this tutorial does. And it should be turned in on time. Both parts should be turned in on time. So those are the basic following directions. Just because I didn't mention it here, however, doesn't mean that I didn't bring it up at some earlier point. And it's your job as a student to make sure that any directions I've given you, you have taken the time to follow. Okay, so 20% of the grade on your documentary, 20 points, is going to be presentation. And the question you have to ask yourself is, what does a quality presentation look like electronically? I think you guys have a really good idea of what that looks like on paper when you hand something in on paper, but I get a lot of things from you guys, recorded things like this tutorial, where I can't understand what you're saying, you're speaking too low, or your voice is a monotone, you're speaking like a robot, or the pictures and the words don't really match up, or I can't understand why you put that picture where you did, or it's just not well organized. Look at this slide. This slide is poorly designed. I have everything off to the left-hand side, leaving all this white space over here that's not very attractive to look at. I have not cropped my photo. This is the only part of the photo that I really need. I should have cropped it before I put it in here, because that's all I care about. I don't need to see these books, and I don't need to see this stuff over here. And one thing that I really can't stand when students do this, and teachers do it too sometimes, is when they write a whole bunch of words on a slide that really should be a picture, and we should hear you saying that blah, blah, blah part. Not actually blah, blah, blah though, right? So be thinking about your presentation. Don't make your slides too busy. Say it, don't write it. Make sure your fonts are clear and readable. Sometimes students have a tendency to make their fonts fun and interesting, and then they're not readable. Keep it simple. Simple is usually much better for a presentation of this type. Make sure you have good contrast between your background and your writing and your pictures. And make sure your sound quality is good. There shouldn't be like a whole bunch of background noise I can't hear over. Obviously, I know how difficult it is because I make these tutorials to get all the background noise gone. But you should work on making sure that if the background noise is completely taking away from your tutorial or your presentation, that's no good either. So try and balance that. And my final recommendation would be to script what you're going to say so that you don't have too many long pauses and umming and ohing and and stuff like that, because that can be really boring to listen to. So there's just a few things that I want to point out to you about presentation, along with the fact that it should make sense sequence-wise. So every frame should follow the previous frame, and you should say to yourself, oh yeah, that makes sense that this follows that. It should be logical in that way. And your transitions between slides should be smooth. I shouldn't be thinking, wow, that was really jarring, just went from this to that. Here's a slide design that's a little more attractive to look at. I have a nice cropped picture on a nice dark background. It's light, so I made my background dark. And I could add a title. I don't have to have no text. I could add a title like, say, how about that? Potential, kinetic, and dissipated energy. And that lets my viewer know what I'm about to talk about. And then I could go ahead and talk about the differences in my potential and kinetic and dissipated energy along this track. Supporting details is worth 30 points on the rubric, so you want to make sure that you show me evidence of following the entire design planning process. So that means I should see evidence of your brainstorming stage. I should see evidence of how you narrowed your design options based on some of your preliminary data. That's the data that you got both by working with the this program, the online program, and also the data that you just collected from playing around with your coaster and making little modifications before you actually started the final testing. So you should be talking about how did you decide on the design that you wanted to choose, because you started out, if you did it properly, with each person had 3 designs, and then if you multiply 3 times the number of people in your group, that in theory is how many designs you started with. So there should be something in your presentation that explains how you decided to go with the design you went with. Then you need evidence of the final tweaks and modifications that you made based on the data you got on your test of your final model. And then finally, you need to have evidence of reflecting on how well your prototype worked. So after your prototype demonstration to me, you want to ask yourself, okay, how did that go? Were there things we could have done better? Were there things that we wish we had done? Were there things lessons learned that we should mention? That's basically the gist of the supporting details section. It's mostly, I'm looking in this area for you to show me that you went through all of the stages of the design process. Brainstorming, narrowing the design, making your tweaks and modifications, and then reflecting on the final design and how well it worked. Last but not least, higher level thinking is 45 points. There's 2 pieces of higher level thinking. You get 20 points for your prototype meeting all the specifications. Since there's 5 different specifications that you're graded on, that makes each one of those specs worth a maximum of 4 points. And you can get partial credit on those as well. But the documentary is where the other 25 points come from of higher level thinking. And what I'm looking for here is that in your documentary, you take one of the 3 essential questions, they're on the back of your rubric. You take one of those essential questions and use that question to show me what you know about velocity and acceleration, forces, that includes friction and gravity, the normal force, and the applied force, and energy, including kinetic, potential, and dissipated energy. And possibly you might want to mention something about Newton's laws, although they don't come up as much in this project as some of the other things do. So you need to look at those 3 essential questions and decide which one you think you can work with to help explain what you've learned through this project about those things. So let's look at those questions. Okay, so here are the essential questions. These are on the back of the holistic rubric if you are looking at the hard copy, and if you're looking on the classroom, it's just the 2nd page of the rubric. So make sure that you have a copy of this either electronically or on paper. You're going to choose just one of these questions, and what you want to do in your documentary, you're going to take a slide or 2 or maybe even 3 and use one of these questions as a jumping off point to talk about what you know about physics. So if you pick the first one, the question focuses on energy, but that doesn't mean you can't also talk about velocity and acceleration and forces and how those things affect energy. Likewise, the second one is a question about gravity, because we're changing gravity by moving the coaster to the moon. So just because the question focuses on gravity doesn't mean you can't bring up all the other physics concepts that we've learned. And the final one is about making the track frictionless. But again, just because the focus is on friction in that question doesn't mean you can't talk about the other physics concepts that you've learned. So you're kind of getting the idea. I need you to take this question and turn your answer into something that really shows the learning that you got out of the whole physics unit, including the roller coaster project. Okay, I hope that this has clarified for you what you're going to be graded on. You will have the entire week after Thanksgiving to complete your documentary and turn it in. And I will see you guys in class. Have a happy Thanksgiving.